Next on Channel 33, the news at 10. Good evening. The headlines. Everyone hopes for a peaceful solution, but war preparations are continuing. James Baker meets Mubarak, seeking support for military action against Iraq. Now he's left for Ankara. A radical Jewish leader is assassinated in New York, probably by an Arab, raising tensions in Israel. The Red Army tries to find its place in the new Soviet Union. And the balls go into the pockets at Al Nasser Stadium. The Minister of Finance and Industry, His Highness Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum, has met the Romanian Minister of Labour and Transport, Duro Panana. They discussed ways of boosting economic and trade cooperation, as well as encouraging joint investments in both public and private sectors. The meeting was attended by the Romanian Chargé d'Affaires. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the UAE's Defence Minister, has held talks with the Kuwaiti Ambassador, Mohammed Saud Al Umayya. The envoy briefed Sheikh Mohammed on the conditions of Kuwaitis in the UAE. Sheikh Mohammed assured Al Umayya that Kuwaitis would always be welcome here. The ambassador thanked the government for its support. Sheikh Mohammed later met an American security delegation. The team is also scheduled to hold talks with Dubai police on cooperation between the two countries. The meeting was attended by the commander of the Maktoum 1st Brigade, His Highness Major General Sheikh Marwan bin Maktoum, the Commander General of Dubai Police, Brigadier Dahi Khalfan Tamim.
Off-the-cuff outburst from George Bush the day before over Iraqi treatment of U.S. diplomats left in Kuwait.
And do you think I'm concerned about it? You're darn right I am. And what I'm going to do about it, let's just wait and see. Because I have had it with that kind of treatment of Americans.
Even though James Baker made a point of going straight to see U.S. troops in the desert, analysts doubt that the Secretary of State is traveling the Middle East and Europe with a war plan in his pocket, not least because, as Secretary of State, it is not his job to have one. Analysts see Mr. Baker's travels as a mission to shore up alliance unity, which drifted precariously during President Bush's budget crisis and the slump in his popularity. Convincing Saddam Hussein that the alliance is further building its military strength, this weekend the Syrians unloaded their first tanks in Saudi Arabia and is ultimately prepared to go to war if necessary, is at the heart of this new American initiative with full British backing. The trouble is that even with another 100,000 American troops and another 1,000 U.S. tanks on the way by early next year, within 24 hours of cranking up the pressure on Baghdad last week, and saying he had had it with Iraq, Mr. Bush himself appeared to do an about-face and undermine his own strategy of ultimate war.
And I hope there will never be a shot fired in anger.
Of course there is concern amongst the highest political authorities at maintaining the coherence of the present international community's unanimity. But my own personal view is quite clear that at this time, the penalties of going to war are far greater than the penalties of maintaining the present system of blockade, of staying with the economic and diplomatic measures.
And the evidence in the desert backs that up. Very little ammunition has been released to be deployed forward, as would happen before an all-out assault. And within the U.S. forces, there remain significant hardware supply problems. Only half the planned number of tanks delivered, and plans to ship more from Europe held up by inter-service squabbling.
The American Secretary of State, James Baker, has held talks with the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak on who will have overall control of Allied troops in Saudi Arabia. Baker also met the Chinese Foreign Minister Chiang Kai-shek for talks on the crisis. Observers said Mubarak was expected to support Baker's strategy. Egypt has sent more than 14,000 troops to defend the kingdom. Earlier in Jeddah, Baker reached agreement with Saudi leaders on operational control of their troops. It gives virtually a free hand to the United States to command its troops in an attack on Iraq or Iraqi troops in Kuwait.
He had come to test the will to fight, and in Saudi Arabia, James Baker found a government in hawkish mood. The American Secretary of State and King Fahad addressed the question of how a battle would be fought with so many different nations involved. The American message, war may be imminent. The relationship between the senior American officer, Norman Schwarzkopf, and his Saudi counterparts is at the heart of the agreement reached by the Americans and Saudis. Whilst the troops are in Saudi Arabia, they'll operate under a joint American and Saudi command. But if fighting moves beyond the borders of Saudi Arabia, into Kuwait or Iraq, they would be under US command. In other words, the Saudis will continue to have a say in how their land is defended, but if there's an attack on Saddam, America will call the shots. British forces in Saudi Arabia are under national command, in the sense that Britain retains the right to make political decisions about their future place in the multinational force. And that isn't changed by the agreement between America and Saudi Arabia. But Britain has already said that it's willing to see them operate under American tactical control. In other words, taking American orders on the ground.
President Saddam Hussein has ordered the release of 106 hostages, including 77 Japanese, held in Iraq since its invasion of Kuwait on August the 2nd. The release of the Japanese was decided as a result of a plea by former Japanese Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone. Meanwhile, the former West German Chancellor Willy Brandt continued his talks aimed at securing the release of Western hostages. He visited several dozen hostages living in the German embassy compound, raising hopes that he might be able to win their freedom. A group of Marines are to be the first United States military reservists called up for active duty to be sent to the Gulf. They're being told to report for duty in a few days' time.
The Pentagon has decided to call up major combat reserve units for Operation Desert Shield. Officials say decisions on which units will go and when are expected to be made soon. Until now, only support reservists had been activated, about 34,000. The combat reservists are expected primarily to replace troops rotating home from Saudi Arabia after 6 to 8 months of duty.
Basically, there's only a few places in which you can draw troops to rotate for those that are currently serving in the Gulf. This will permit you to increase that rotation base.
The combat reserves most likely to go will be from units associated with active duty divisions. Reservists will get 1 month of desert warfare training at Fort Irwin, California, before going to the Saudi desert. Congress, just prior to its recess, quietly increased the length of time combat reserves can be activated from 6 months to a year. Support units can still be activated only for 180 days. There are other signs the U.S. is getting closer to combat. With bodies already returning to the United States from training accidents in the Gulf, the Army has started activating what are called Graves Registration Units, meaning morticians. And the Midway Aircraft Carrier Battle Group has steamed into the Persian Gulf, the second carrier to do so in recent weeks. The Navy says the Midway will conduct routine training operations, but its combat aircraft are now in striking distance of Iraqi targets without the need for mid-air refueling.
I honestly believe that we are in a very transitional period in the world's history, a period of time during which any kind of situation like this can rear its head. And if we're not prepared to respond in the way the President has responded in this instance, we are inviting disaster.
But while the Pentagon prepares for the possibility of war, it's clearly unwilling to push the limits of American public support. Officials point out that activating combat reserves means they're much less likely to revive the draft, which would certainly be a divisive political bombshell.